So you've spent a lot of your career studying spider venoms, specifically how venom chemistry evolves across thousands of species. If a friend
Mhm.
who'd really never thought about spiders that way asked you to explain what you do in 1 to 2 sentences, how would you do it?
I discover the what's in a spider venom, and that's not very straightforward because a single spider can have hundreds of chemicals in its venom, and there are no spiders for which we know 100% of what's in the venom. So it's an interesting puzzle for me just to know what venom is. But then the question of, and each spider has a different composition, and so we want to know how and why that's come about.
Yeah. So I was reading a little bit about your bio, and you write about being hooked the moment you learned how we actually know about the organisms that share our world. Was there a specific spider or paper or a specific moment that really pulled you into arachnology? And is there still that pull like years later for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had the great opportunity to go to the rainforest in Peru when I was an undergraduate. And at that point, I didn't think I would be a scientist. It had never occurred to me that I could be. And we were in the rainforest in Peru with these amazing biodiversity specialists who were pointing left and right. See that spider? We don't know what that is. See that spider? Unknown, unknown, unknown. And it blew my mind how little we knew about the biodiversity that was around us. And then across the river, the forests were being burned. And I was reading a book by E.O. Wilson that, in his phrasing, said losing biodiversity before we know it exists is like burning a library before we read the books. And that really hooked me. And not only were the species unknown, but each of those species contains all of this venom chemistry. So that moment just blew my mind in terms of how much biodiversity is out there and how little we know it.
Yeah, so when most people hear the word spider, they go straight to fear. They don't really think about the silk that's stronger than sometimes steel, or you talked a little bit about this venoms that are full of these types of compounds that don't exist anywhere in nature. What's something about spiders that would really surprise the average person?
Well, spiders have very little interest in you. The last thing they want to do most of the time is bite a person. And so they're harmless by and large. There are a few that are harmful, but I think people fear them. And in reality, they're eating a huge amount of insect biodiversity. They're helping to maintain stable ecosystems. And if somebody can have their wish and wiggle their nose and make all spiders go away, our ecosystems would collapse. They eat so much biomass that they're just integral parts of maintaining balance in our forests and our ecosystems. And that combined with the fact that they make incredibly gorgeous webs, they have biomaterials that we're learning from. They have great things to teach us about biomaterials, about the evolution of behavior, for example. And then their venoms, my interests are like a treasure trove of chemistry that's got activities that we barely understand, right? So they're evolved to meticulously target other organisms, and they do that in ways that go beyond our understanding of how our bodies work. So they're great tools for helping us better understand our own bodies and other organisms.
Yeah. So your lab has shown that the toxin in brown recluse venom, the one that causes necrotic lesions, also shows up in a related genus called Sicarius. It likely, my understanding is it came from a shared ancestor of both. So could you explain a little bit about what that finding actually means and why it matters?
Oh, I'd love to. So yeah, based on our work, we were able to go to all the places where the brown recluse and their relatives live and their close relatives, get their venom and test it for the presence of this enzyme that causes damage when they bite us. So brown recluse are one of the very few kinds of spiders that have venoms that directly affect us. And so we surveyed across, we used the tree of life to choose who to study, which spiders to study. And we just walked our way farther and farther away in terms of evolutionary distance from the brown recluse until we couldn't find that activity. So we were able to isolate the group that had it, and then outside of that group, they don't. So using that kind of comparative logic, we know that the common ancestor of the whole family that includes the brown recluse, a family called Sicariidae, that's where that toxin evolved sometime before that ancestor. And every species in that family then has different variants of this toxin. What's super cool in my mind is that we've been able to figure out that the common ancestor of that family was on Gondwana, which was a supercontinent that includes South America and Africa, and was last connected 90 million years ago. It split apart. The last connection was 90 million years ago. The common ancestor of this family was 120-ish million years ago. So something happened in the genomes of this ancestor that turned on a protein that was already there to be expressed in the venom. And then after that, there are about 180 species in the family, and that venom toxin has diversified within that lineage for over 100 million years. And in that diversification, they've evolved these different ways to interact with cell surfaces. And so we're still figuring out those different ways that they interact with cell surfaces. And that can teach us a lot about how cell surfaces are structured, for example, how these end. So what they do is they sit down on the surface of a cell and snip the head off of something called a phospholipid, which is what covers our cells. Some of them snip some kinds of heads off, like a dandelion head, if you will, if you think of it as a lawn. Others might target specifically something like a crabgrass. Others work on both. And so, in that context, in this family of spiders, it's had an explosion of biochemical diversification, which is really fun. You also asked about the relevance to us. The relevance is we still don't fully understand why humans react the way we do to this toxin. And when one of these spiders bites you, it's not just one of these types of toxins, it's a handful of them. And so they're all interacting in a way that kicks off an immune response in our bodies, and then our bodies react by cutting off the blood flow to the bite site. They commit something like tissue suicide. That happens in some people, but not everybody. So by studying this evolutionary framework, we can get a better sense of the full range of diversity of these toxins and try to think about how, in combination, they do what they do to us.
Yeah, so you do a lot of real field work, collecting spiders, looking at their behavior, watching how they take down prey. What is it actually like out there? And is there anything that surprised you the first time you went looking for spiders in the wild?
Oh, that's such a great question. It's one of my favorite things to do. So, what surprised me is it's like a scavenger hunt with a purpose, which makes it really fun. And what I do is go to different parts of the country or different parts of the world, and these spiders live usually underneath rocks and wood on the ground, and I flip something over. And the brown recluse, there are about 150 species in that one genus. They're really docile. You might think of them as being cranky and mean, but they're super docile. So imagine I flip over a piece of wood and they have these bluish silk strands that are super soft and cottony. And the spider will just sit there and not move. And so they're very easy to catch. You just put a little tube over the top of them and scoop them in, and they never threaten to bite. They're very docile. They're easy to catch, and and I think they're beautiful. And so we've done this now in all across South America and then Southern Africa. And a fun thing about the ones in Southern Africa is that the brown recluse just has a uniform brown abdomen. Spiders have these two body parts, right? The cephalothorax, where the legs are attached, and then the abdomen. Usually the ones we see are just uniform brown, but in Africa they have these like leopard spot like abdomens. So they've got literally orange and black patches, and they're a little bit furrier. And so that just always cracks me up. They look like little leopards in Africa where leopards are found. So, yeah, they're actually very endearing once you get to know them.
Yeah, so there's I think about 50,000 known spider species and probably tens of thousands that we haven't really described, and only a fraction of them carry very dangerous venom to humans. What really gets
That's right.
lost when people are talking about spiders and they all become scary in the
That's just so human centric. They all, almost all of them have venom. They eat, and as I was saying earlier, they eat a ton of different kinds of prey. Literally, they eat the same amount of biomass that humans eat they eat, what's the quote? I should get this right. They eat as much biomass, which means like the total weight of things that spiders eat in the world is the equivalent of the total biomass of humans on Earth. This is a paper that came out a few years ago that estimated these numbers. And their venoms are there to immobilize insects, by and large, insects and other arthropods, meaning other spiders and things. There's very little to be afraid of. They're not aggressive in general. There are a couple kinds that are aggressive, but not the ones in the United States.
Yeah, a lot of spider venoms have potential in the future as medicine. A lot of compounds are being looked at for pain, neurological disease, even stuff like cancer. What's actually realistic in those types of discoveries?
That's a great question. The most realistic properties that would be useful for us are insecticidal, because as I just said, most of the components in a spider's venom are targeting insects. It's really hard to get anything through like drug testing or insecticidal toxicity testing because you really want a compound that's going to be specific to whatever you're targeting. One thing that's really cool these days that there again, it's an application of venom, but there are these parasitic wasps that they immobilize different organisms and lay their eggs either inside them or on the outside of them, but they're very specialized in terms of their hosts. And we can actually genetically engineer toxins that might be discovered, say, in a spider venom, and this parasitoid wasps could deliver it directly to what we wanted to target. That technology is actively being worked on, and I find that particularly exciting because you don't have the secondary effects of a toxin that's off target. So imagine if we could find a toxin or a parasitic wasp that was targeting like the African corn borer that decimates corn in Africa and has huge implications for food availability. That would be really tremendous.
Mhm.
Or pine beetles that are decimating our western forests.
Yeah, so this is a little bit more of a general question, but on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the most urgent, how worried should the average person be about biodiversity loss and especially the loss of species we haven't really described yet and why that particular number?
Very, I'd say four. There are a lot of things to be concerned about right now, but biodiversity loss, I think, is just under the radar and not on in people's minds. But we are interdependent in our ecosystems to a degree, at a degree to which we don't fully understand. So as we lose these components without even knowing they're there, we don't really know how these systems are going to collapse. Yeah, I'd say a four,
Hmm.
and that's really just relative to the other things to be worried about.
Yeah. So, what's one specific thing a regular person who's not a biologist or a conservationist can do that helps with biodiversity, especially for these smaller, you quote unquote, less charismatic species that nobody really campaigns or promotes?
I'd say protect our forests. At an individual level, making your homes and the landscaping, if you have the opportunity to have space around your homes, having that be arthropod friendly, meaning leaving leaves on the ground, for example, that can make a small local effect. But so much of the biodiversity that we depend on is in forests. And so when you convert, say, an old growth forest into a worst case scenario, clear cut, there's a ton of biodiversity that's living on the forest floor. And that's, imagine it's like a deep, loamy surface with little canals and things like an apartment complex of really cool stuff. That just gets washed away. And that's where we're losing things that we don't even know is there. And those organisms are building the soil. So soils in forests are made of mostly arthropod poop. So poop of spiders and insects and other invertebrates. That's what's making soil. So when we lose that, we have to artificially rebuild the soil and it's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
I'd say think about the forest floor and trying to conserve that.
Hmm. Yeah, so who are a few scientists that you think I should interview after you? They don't have to be arachnologists or in that particular field.
Oh, that's a great question. Wow, I don't know. I have to think about that a little bit more. I would say it'd be fun to interview oceanographers, like for example, maybe microbial ecologists that are studying the waters. Those are systems about which we don't understand. We need to understand more, and they're super important. So maybe a microbial ecologist.
Yeah,
Um,
do you have anyone in mind who you think you could? I mean, I can send you an email if you don't have anyone off the top of your head, of course, but
I'll think about it. I'll
yeah,
think about it.
I'll follow up.
Yeah,
And
that
I
just came
got
out of the blue. There's so many people that are
Yeah,
doing
I
so
know,
many
I
cool
know.
things that are important,
Yeah,
but
I ask every scientist this, and I've gotten a lot of different answers, so there's a lot of different ways to answer this question. So, if every teenager on Earth had to hear one final sentence from you, what would it be?
pay attention to the animals, to the organisms that share our earth right now. It's extraordinary and mind-blowing. So go outside. Don't be afraid to roll things over. Get a hand lens, look really closely, look for tardigrades. It'll blow your mind. And for me, there's so much wonder and joy in knowing that I live on earth right now with all of this glorious diversity that's around us. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's all I have for you tonight. I really appreciate you coming talking for 15, 20 minutes with me about this stuff.